This week in Wonderkids, we learned about food science. So as always, we started by asking our students, what do you think food science is? This is what many of them had to say.
Food science is the science of food and how you experiment it to see if it's good to eat or to make food.
I think what food science is, you like freeze drying stuff and they do like experiments with food.
I think food science is making food safely.
Learning about food?
I don't know, and I think it is scientists who discover out food if good or bad.
I think it's about when you take a food break.
I think food science means like people making food, like a potato. If you put charges in it, it could tell what time it is.
Does science but with food?
They're trying to make M&Ms.
On Friday, the students were able to meet our guest speaker of the week, Miss Emma, who taught us all about food science.
So just a little bit about me. This is a picture of me at Hershey Park when I was 5 years old. I grew up in New Jersey, so pretty far away from you guys, but I went to school in Boston. So I moved a little bit, went to Boston University. I actually went to college with Miss Jess. And then both of us moved to California at the same time. And that's where I went to Chapman University. And at Chapman, I got a master's in food science. So that's where I learned all about food science. And when I was living outside of LA, that's where I got my first job in food science. And then I was missing my family back on the East Coast. So I moved back to Pennsylvania and I got a job. I'm a food scientist, product developer. So I work in our research and development group. And my whole job is to get to invent new snacks and candies. So it's pretty much the best job that I could ever think of. But food science is kind of a lot of things. It's the whole step from producing anything that you can buy in the grocery store or even in restaurants. Sophia, I see you have an applesauce packet. So a lot of food science actually went into that. So if you think about it, even from the farming level, farmers do a lot of science. They have to think about all sorts of science to make sure that they're growing the tastiest, healthiest, best food. So some farmers did a lot of work to make sure that the apples going into that applesauce packet were the absolute best, tastiest apples they could be. Then there's people that work in quality control. So those are the people who make sure that the food that you're eating is safe for you. They make sure that there's no diseases, no anything in it. And they make sure that it tastes, they make sure that it was made correctly to the right recipe. So those are really important people. So you can trust that anything you get from the grocery store is safe to eat, which is awesome. And then there's engineers. So engineers are great because they get to build all of the equipment that we make food with. So they're really, really important. A lot of work to make sure that the equipment that they're building works correctly and is safe for the people that run the machines, right? Because we don't want them to get hurt either. So that's a really important job. One of the more fun ones, in my opinion, is sensory science. So if you think about your senses, right? Taste, touch, your sight, any of that can all be used for science. So people are trained to know how foods are supposed to taste. They can be trained to analyze if something changes in a food, make sure that it's tasting the right way, that it looks the right way. If we have to change an ingredient for some reason, they make sure that you guys don't notice any changes. So sensory science is really cool. They're the ones they get paid to just eat food all the time. So that's really cool. And then there's people like me. So I work in research and development, like I said. So I'm the one that creates the recipes and comes up with the ingredients to make completely new foods. But that's not all. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do with food science, which is one of the reasons that I really liked learning about it, because pretty much any part of food, transportation of food, packaging of food, right? Sophia, with your applesauce packet, someone had to invent that packet, and then someone had to figure out how to make them, and someone else had to figure out how to pack them with applesauce. There's so many people all along the way for any single food that you could find at the grocery store. And all of those people do food science. So it's really cool. And there's pretty much anything that you could think of, you can do it with food science. So just in a little bit more detail of like some of the stuff that I've done as a food scientist. So I worked for a little bit in food labeling. So it was my job to take the recipes that people had created and do all of these calculations to figure out what the nutrition facts were. So figuring out how much fat was in the food, figuring out how much sugar and salt were in the food, figuring out what order to put all of the ingredients in the ingredient statement for those of you who've seen food packets. So that's a really important job because you want to make sure that people know exactly what they're eating, right? So you have to do a lot of math there to make sure that you're putting the right information on every single food pack. This is kind of the process that we do to come up with a brand new snack food, right? It has to start somewhere, and it always starts with ideas. And then once we have that one idea, we'll start prototyping. So that's when I get to go into our lab. I get to start trying to make a new sample, new flavors. Once I have a recipe that I'm really happy with, that's when I get to go to consumer testing. So this is where we get to go to normal people and have them try our food and tell us what they think. Because we want to make sure that whatever we make isn't just good to us. We want to make sure that people who are going to be buying the food actually think it tastes good too, right? So we'll do a lot of rounds of consumer tests where they'll try different versions and we'll see which one's the final best version of the recipe. Then we'll take it to what we call a plant trial or a scale-up test. And that's where we get engineering involved because we have to make sure that our recipe works on the machinery. And then if that trial goes really well and all of the machines worked and everything tastes great, then that's when we have our final recipe and we can actually go and launch it and put it out into the marketplace, which is my favorite part, because then people like you get to go and see it in the grocery store. But this process is never quite straightforward. If you guys have learned a little bit about science or the scientific process, there's a lot of trial and error, and sometimes things don't go right. Sometimes your equipment doesn't work properly. Maybe you've given it to people and they've tried it and they're like, oh no, this is kind of gross. And then we have to start all the way at the beginning, right? And then do it all over again. So it's never quite a straight line. There's always a little bit of back and forth that we have to do. So this is where I want you guys to kind of help me out here. I want us to brainstorm and come up with a brand new flavor for a cookie.
A Dorito.
Dorito cookie. I love savory things that are supposed to be sweet, so that's perfect. So Lila, what shape do you think our Dorito cookie should be?
I think it should be a triangle.
What do you think we should put into our Dorito cookie? Do you think we should add anything to it?
I think we should add sprinkles.
So do you think this cookie should be baked, pre-baked, or do you think it should be like a cookie dough?
It should be like a cookie dough.
Good pick. All right, so we have just invented or come up with the idea for a Dorito flavored cookie that's going to be triangle shaped with rainbow sprinkles, and it's going to be little cookie doughs that you can take home and bake at home. And what would happen at work is someone would come up with an idea just like that, and then they would come to someone like me and they would say, how do we make it? So once we get to that point, there's still quite a few things that we have to figure out, right? We have to figure out, where do we get all these ingredients? Where do I get Dorito flavor? I don't know. So I'd have to do a lot of research and try and figure out how I can make a cookie taste like Doritos. I'd have to maybe find another place that could make it, or maybe we'd have to buy some brand new equipment. I'd have to get engineering to help us out. And then the expiration date is always really, really important. If you guys have seen expiration dates on your food, it's really important for us to figure out how long those foods can last so that we can make sure that you guys are eating safe food that's not spoiled. And then the last one, because it's always really important, is how much does it cost? Because we want to make the best cookie, but we also want to make it something that's affordable so that you guys can buy it at the grocery store. So those are all the things that I would have to go into my lab and try and figure out and put all together. But the most important part of any food science product that you work on is how it tastes. So we work with our sensory scientists and they are expert tasters. So I'm gonna talk just a little bit about taste, right? Because taste is so important to food and so important to food science. Did you guys know that your tongue has 10,000 taste buds on it? That's so many taste buds, but there's only 5 things that you can taste. Most of flavor. So whenever you taste something like a Dorito, most of that flavor isn't just sweet or salty. It's actually aromas or smells that you're smelling, even though you're not putting them in your nose. So if you look at that picture, you can see how your mouth and your nose are actually connected through like one long system of tubes. And so every time you chew on your food, tiny, tiny pieces and tiny, tiny chemicals are released and they go up into your nose, and you're actually smelling them even if you don't think that you are. So our little food flavor experiment. I personally have some Jolly Rancher gummies. They're sour. It works best if we get something that's either sweet or sour or really salty, so that you can taste it. So, all right, so what we're gonna do first, we're gonna take our food and we're gonna smell it. See if you can smell anything makes you think about that food. So I'm smelling a green apple gummy. It kind of smells a little bit like apple. All right, so after you've smelled your food, we're gonna do something, but we've got to be really careful here because you do have to still breathe. So we're gonna plug our nose, and then while we plug our nose, we're gonna eat a little bit of our food. So you might have to breathe with your mouth open. So you might have to take breaks in between chewing to make sure that you breathe, but keep your nose plugged and chew and see if you taste anything like what you smelled. If you have something sweet, it might just taste like sugar. Mine is a little bit sour, so mine just tastes a little sour to me. And then if you open your nose while you're chewing, you should get the full flavor. So I didn't taste any apple with my gummy when I was chewing it with my nose plugged. And then the second that I opened up my nose, I could smell apple. Did anyone else see that with their snacks? What are some of the snacks that you guys have?
I have a corn or a potato chip, and when I ate it, I tasted a little bit of corn, and it was salty too.
Salty?
And when I opened my nose, it smelled like corn.
When I pinched my nose and I tasted, it just tasted like sugar. And when I unplugged my nose, it tasted like chocolate.
I had banana, and when I tried mine with my nose plugged, it tasted like bitter / like it mostly tasted like nothing. But when I tried it without my nose plugged, it was nice and sweet.
I also got this Swedish fish, and it tastes like strawberry.
But could you taste it when your nose was plugged? What did it taste like when your nose was plugged?
It also just tastes like sugar, but not strong, like a little bit.
Barbecue chips?
So were those salty?
No, they didn't taste like anything.
What did they taste like once you unplugged? Could you taste all that barbecue?
They taste like barbecue.
As always, we end with our post-test asking our students what they think food science is. This is what many of them had to say.
Okay, so what I do is a person tasting a food. It's like a smoothie. I think food science is making food safely. Person who makes food?
A food science makes new food.
I wrote food scientists are people who study food and sees if it's good for us or if it's bad for us.
I drew like 3 examples. One example is like the expiration date. The other one is like trying out new ways to make new foods, and the other one is how much does it cost.
Thank you. Thank you.